When Brandon Fleming was 18, he was kind of a wreck. He had started college but quickly dropped out. He had sold and abused drugs, flirted with gang life, and been kicked out by his exhausted mother. Fleming finally found a stressful and soul crushing job at a vitamin factory, which he wasn't very good at. When he told an older coworker that he had voluntarily walked away from his shot at an education, she was furious with him. Did he not understand that everybody in that place would have done anything to trade places with him? How dare he throw away what she called his golden ticket? From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. Fleming's road back from an early life of both poor choices and disadvantages he had nothing to do with did not play out like he had a golden ticket. He made a lot of mistakes. He had to put in more effort than many of the people around him, and he wasn't entirely sure that all his work would even pay off. Imagine how surprised 18-year-old Brandon Fleming would be to meet 30-year-old Brandon Fleming, who did finish college, joined the Harvard University debate faculty in his mid-20s, and founded the nationally acclaimed Harvard Diversity Project, and now is the published author of a memoir called Miseducated. Brandon, welcome to Think.
Chris, thank you so much. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. So I want to start with this. When somebody mentions the devil to you, you don't imagine like a red demon with horns. You picture a guy who looks a lot like your one-time stepfather.
Yeah, that's correct. Growing up was very challenging for me because home was not a home for me, and it's because of the person who lived there. My mother was married to a man who was a Baptist preacher by day, but by night he was a cocaine addict. And for many years, my siblings and I were subjected to his abuse. And it changed me. It changed me in ways that I quite honestly did not understand at that age.
So there were beatings, there were constant insults, not just of you, but of your mother. He also had this like bizarre daily punishment for you that lasted 5 years. What was that all about?
He did, he always found interesting and creative ways to make us suffer, and one of those ways was writing sentences, where every single day I could never forget, I would come home from school and I could not eat. I could not go outside. I could not do anything. I couldn't even do my homework until I had written 1,000 sentences. And I would have to give those sentences to him after I finished it. And after that, he would force me to rip it, several pages, several hours spent writing those sentences, and then I would have to rip them all. And he would just erupt into a rage.
What was the sentence?
I will not be the bad child that I am.
Huh.
That's what he made me write.
I mean, is there any way to not absorb the message that you are, in fact, a bad child?
Of course, every child has their challenges. Children have their ways. But it's really about what does bad mean? What was I misguided? Was I inherently bad? Was I just doing what children do? And so when it was kind of encoded in my mind that I was bad, I kind of felt like whatever good was, I was the opposite of that, and it was something that I could never be. And so that's when I started to undergo this change, where I started to behave um, according to whatever it was that I was being called, and according to what I had started to believe about myself.
How did that abuse by your stepfather affect your relationship to your own mother, who was in the military? Sometimes she was deployed and away from the family, but she was sometimes home to witness these things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't ever recall my stepfather beating us when my mother was in the house.
Hmm.
There was one time in particular, he would do it while she was away, and there was one time in particular, I remember my mother coming home one day, and she found me, in my room on the floor crying, and I had no shirt on, and my back was bleeding, because he would take stacks of belts sometimes, and he would whip me across my back with the buckles of those belts. And I had welts on my back, and my mom would hold me and just cry as if there was nothing she could do, and I vividly remember her, scooping Vaseline with her fingers and placing them on my back, polishing those welts on my back, and just crying, feeling sorry for all of us, and I know my mother. She was an immigrant woman, wasn't an educated woman, and definitely went through a lot of challenges herself. So at that time, I didn't know how to have grace for my mother. I didn't know how to empathize for my mother. I just felt like a lot of the abuses that I suffered, whether it was physical abuse or sexual abuse, was because of her choice in men.
Um, and when you would complain to her and say, "Look, this guy is beating us and berating us," she would say, "You guys are ruining my marriage."
Yeah, I think she was going through a state of denial. You know, we'd share with her, she knew what was happening. She knew what was happening, but I don't think she wanted to accept responsibility for the part she played in what was happening for us to us, because I don't know if she necessarily knew how she was going to get out of it,
Hmm.
and so it was just easier to pretend that it was not happening at all, and so yeah, I think, but at the same time, we were all brainwashed. I was brainwashed into thinking I was bad, and my mother was brainwashed into thinking that she had to submit to this man because he constantly used the Bible, to try to convince my mother that being submissive is the quintessence of being a Proverbs 31 virtuous woman.
Hmm.
And my mom wanted to be that virtuous woman. She wanted to be that godly woman. And he even would share with her, scriptures that said that you have to put your husband before your children. And so all this time, he used the Bible to support his nefarious ways. And that's why that chapter where I talk about him is called The Devil Preaches.
As for your actual father, who was divorced from your mom, he came from a very different kind of family than the one you grew up in, but he definitely loved you. What were your visits like with him?
Oh man, in the beginning as a child, that was the only place that I was safe, because my father, my biological father was, I mean, just the perfect father, the dream father. We did everything together. He loved on me, with so much passion, and I mean, he was playful with me, and I mean, I just remember going with him and feeling like that was the only place in the world that I was safe. But then that took a turn, as I grew up. His family was a very upstanding, conservative Christian family, and his father, was a pastor, and so he's a preacher's kid, and he's the first family of their church. And because I started to believe, the things that were happening to me in my home convinced me that, I was nothing like them, especially, when I would go home to New York and I was being indoctrinated by my cousins who ran the streets, and so as I started to become consumed by that life and it started to take on that identity, that identity became the enemy to his own, and he did not want anything to do with that person that I was becoming. And so as a result, he walked away.
Hmm. So, after the stepfather disappeared from your lives, your mother started dating another man whose children were a little bit older than you and your siblings. One of them was asked to babysit you sometimes, and she molested you for more than a year.
Yeah, yeah, she did. It was a babysitter that I had. She was actually, my would-be stepsister. If that relationship had worked out between her father and my mother. And at that time, which is interesting because, one of the things that I recognize is that hurt people end up hurting other people. And she dealt with abuse from her father, and she was a teenager at this time, and of course, at that time I didn't necessarily understand that, that she was hurting too, and that she was in pain, and that did not excuse what she did to me. But it's something that we have to talk about, because people find some sort of outlet to quell and numb the pain that they're dealing with. And I guess, one of the ways she did that was by, engaging me sexually, and so she molested me for many years and introduced me to a life and a lust that I was not ready for at the age of 11.
I mean, maybe the most insidious thing about that abuse was the ways that it confused you, right? Because at a certain point, you started to think you wanted it, which I think a lot of people understand is kind of part of the cycle of abuse. But how exceptionally difficult for a child being victimized to make sense of that experience.
Yeah, it was very confusing because my mind said that I did not want it. My mind hated it, and when she first started doing it was, before I had hit puberty, and so my body would not respond. But then there came a time where my body responded, and it was such a conflicting experience for me because my mind is saying, no, I hate this, but for some reason it felt good, and I hated the fact that it felt good, and it felt like my body was betraying me. And so what started as a curiosity evolved into a craving that I did not know how to control.
So you had this one teacher, Mr. Mills, who seemed different to you than all the other teachers. What was it about him that fascinated you?
Oh my gosh, teachers have always seemed so lame and boring and bland and corny. I mean, teachers, he was different. Everything about him was different. The way he looked was different. Kids care about aesthetic. They care about style. They care about how things look and present. And so when I saw him, he went against the grain of what a typical teacher is supposed to look like, allegedly. And for that reason I was interested. I was like, oh, well, this guy's different, and he spoke eloquently, and I just thought he was really a cool guy. And so we were able to connect in a way that I was not able to connect with any other teacher.
You straight up asked him, how did you learn to talk that way?
I did, I was sitting there, and the reason why, it's kind of funny, so of course, the book talks about my relentless desire, to court girls, in high school, and all the girls used to pay attention to him, like, and in all my other classes, a lot of the girls, they didn't pay attention, they kind of talked and stuff while the teacher talked, but everyone was laser focused on Mr. Mills. I mean, just the way he spoke was so captivating, and I had never seen anyone use their voice to work a room like that. And I was like, how in the world is he doing that? And so I just went up to him after class one day and I said, hey, yo, Mills, hey, man, how you talk like that? And he told me, well, I read. And he told me that he was an English major in college. And so I made note of that.
So you ended up at Liberty University, which seems like an unusual choice maybe for a kid with your history. It is, as I understand it, religiously conservative and like incredibly strict about a lot of rules.
Yes, it was everything about me and my life and my upbringing and my identity. Liberty was the opposite of that, and so here I was. I felt like such an imposter because, here was a place that looked nothing like anyone in my family, any of my friends, and all of a sudden, I'm at this ultra conservative Republican school, and it was challenging because I got there at a time where I didn't understand anything about school, anything about, academics. Yeah, I was there to play basketball, and that was it. And the only reason why I went to Liberty to play basketball is because one of my coaches from high school went to Liberty to play basketball.
So you were there when Barack Obama was elected, and what might have felt like a really triumphant moment turned into a night of violence.
Yeah, it was so unfortunate because, you gotta understand, at this time, I'm just I'm a kid coming out of the hood, came to college to play basketball, and now I'm injured and I can't play basketball anymore, and I'm just left with school. And so this is my first experience with college, and it's a political season. And I remember vividly the night that Barack Obama was elected. There was civil unrest on that campus, and I couldn't comprehend it. I didn't understand why they hated this man so much. I mean, like, what is it about this man that made people want to riot? There were times, this was not the first time that a Democratic president was elected, but for some reason, this man being elected caused these conservative white people to want to riot and to want to fight. And I mean, just the civil unrest that ensued on that campus, it was enough to make me say, I'm done with college. I don't want to be here.
So you drop out, you end up working in that vitamin factory. You became so depressed you didn't want to live anymore.
I did, at that time, the life that I was living was a life that I no longer wanted, because I had officially proved everybody right about what they said I would never be.
Hmm.
You know, my stepfather, my biological father, my teachers, my principals, who wanted to put me in alternative school, everyone who said that that young man is going to be nothing but a hoodlum, nothing but a failure. I realized they were right, and I didn't want to give them that satisfaction. And I felt like I was so deep in failure that the only way to escape was death.
So your mom had an idea for you.
She did, after I attempted suicide, my mother was filled with compassion, and she wanted to give me a second chance. She wanted me to have a second chance at life, to be able to, do something with my life. And she, as a veteran, she gets benefits. One's called the GI Bill, where it gives her an opportunity to have a second life, after her career in the military. But one of the caveats about that is that she could actually transfer those benefits to her dependents, to her children. And she did that for me. And that was the only way for me to go back to school. And I tell people all the time, my mother was my golden ticket.
So your second time around, you had a motivation to try harder. You were still a fish out of water in a lot of ways. When an advisor said, "Okay, what do you want your major to be?" you didn't even know what the term meant.
I did not know anything about. Here's the thing: growing up in my home, we didn't talk about college. I didn't know anything about transcripts, SATs. I didn't learn about any of that stuff until I was a senior and out of the home that I grew up in. And so I didn't know what a major was. Anything is, meeting with my academic advisor, he showed me, oh, well, the major is something what profession you're going to try to pursue. I never thought about what profession I wanted to pursue. When my uncle, used to try to talk sense to me back in the day and ask me, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to be? And I said, Unc, I just want to run these streets.
Hmm.
That's all I cared about, And so, yeah, I'm sitting there going through this list of majors. Like, what in the world is this stuff? I didn't understand any of it. And so I decided that I was going to choose what seemed like the easiest major on the list, and that was English. Only because it was the only one that I recognized. And I said, oh, well, this is going to be a breeze. I speak English, so how difficult can it be? And so I thought I had outsmarted the rigors of college, but the joke was actually on me.
So, of course, an English major is very challenging. You hadn't had a great education before. You had a professor who caught you cheating, and she told you she would not let you fail, which was not the same as saying she would just pass you. Um, she was going to work with you. But she also said, Brandon, you have a choice to make. What were your options as she saw them?
Yeah, she told me, she said, you know what? You have two choices. You can either lament about your disadvantages, or you can do something about them. And it reminded me of something that one of my coaches used to say to me all the time, as an athlete. And he said, listen, son, we don't complain, we compensate. In other words, both of them were saying the same thing to me, that life is not going to give you anything. But when you look at your disadvantages, you have a responsibility to do something about your own condition. And so that was so fundamental for me, and so powerful at a time in my life where I had no idea what I was going to pursue, and what would happen the following years. But that philosophy of life remained with me, and it helped me believe that there was nothing that I could not have if I really wanted it.
So you started to discover the canon of great Black writers in particular in American culture. What did those writers help you understand?
Oh yeah, it's interesting because this is going to sound crazy. I didn't know Black people could be scholars.
Hmm.
And I know, people might think, oh, well, there's Black scholars all over the world. Yes, that might be true, but there were not Black scholars in my world. Not in the microcosm in which I existed, where there were Black drug dealers and Black gangsters and Black athletes. And so that's what I thought I could be because that's what I had access to. Young people can't be what they can't see. Representation is a lens through which we dream and aspire. And so I never saw Black scholars in my community, never saw them on my television, never saw them in my textbooks. So I didn't have access to that. But all of a sudden, when my professor introduced me to Black scholars, she invited me. She opened this world up to me, and she invited me in, and I saw that there was a space for me there.
How did you end up on the debate team in college?
So after I read the book about Malcolm X and watched the movie, I was just voraciously searching for other movies about Black scholars and Black orators, and I came across this movie called The Great Debaters because Denzel Washington starred in the Malcolm X movie, and he also starred in this movie about the Great Debaters, and I'm watching it, and I was just enthralled, like, oh my goodness. Because here's the thing, after basketball, I never had anywhere to redirect my competitive drive. And so when I saw this movie about debate, I was like, man, like if only this was a real thing. And come to find out it was a real thing. And my school actually had a debate team. And so I went and tried out for the debate team and I made it.
So at first you were losing tournaments and then you changed your approach.
Oh yeah, I was a terrible debater. that that's one of life's greatest ironies for me is that I'm the assistant debate coach at Harvard University, but I actually never won a single debate in my life. Not competitively. Because things I'm just this fledgling debater. Trying to figure out how to become acclimated in this intellectual and academic activity, but I was severely behind my teammates and other debaters from around the country. And so, but I was still discovering my own power and my own voice, and I was going through this metamorphosis, and it was so powerful for me that I was like, man, like if only other young people like me could experience this. And so I started teaching debate to young people in my community.
So you decided you wanted to be not just a teacher, but the kind of teacher you had needed at the age of your students. What did that mean exactly?
Well, one of the things that we oftentimes mistakenly do is we accuse young people of being disinterested. I don't think young people are disinterested. I think young people are disengaged. And so what happens as adults when we accuse young people being disinterested, we remove ourselves from the equation and put all the blame on them. But when we acknowledge that they're disengaged, we accept and acknowledge our responsibility to marry their interests with our agenda. Because there are things that we want young people to care about. There are things we want young people to know. But we have to understand how to engage them in ways that work for them and how to meet them where they are. And so, as a young teacher, I had to learn how to do that. And I realized that it's not that I was dumb growing up. I was disengaged. I didn't have a teacher who knew how to meet me where I was. I didn't have a teacher who knew how to inspire me to want to learn. And so that's what I realized what I needed, and that's what I knew I needed to become.
And you wanted them to think of themselves not just as students or classmates, but as scholars. What is the distinction in your mind?
Yeah, scholarship is a lifestyle. It's not just something that you do. It's something that you are. And I learned that from basketball. You know, my coaches used to always tell me while you're sitting at home on your butt, somebody else is in the gym getting better than you. You know, that's the spirit of a competitor, of a champion. And so what we're wanting to create are champions of life. And so as a result, you know, we had to help them understand, you know, that just learning is, being this whole experience is not just about learning in the classroom, but it's about the world being your classroom and being a perpetual learner. You know, and that's when you start to not just be a student, but you become a scholar.
How did you realize debate could work as a teaching tool?
You know, I realize it because the debate is centered around engagement. It's when you take an idea and make it your own. There's nothing that you will own more than your own perspective, than your own ideas. That's why so many young people love math and science so much, because they get the opportunity to create things. So whether it's an object that you create or an idea that you create, it's yours, and you'll have pride in that. And so what happens is, Carter G. Woodson once said, the mere imparting of information is not education. The effort must result in one's ability to think and to do for himself. And so what debate teaches, it teaches you how to think for yourself, and it teaches you how to create ideas that are going to help advance the world.
And some of your students were killer debaters.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. They are exceptional. Every group of debaters that I've trained, have become they've become champions. Starting with that group when I was in college, and I started training those kids in the community. Those kids went from a cumulative 1.2 GPA to every single one of them made an AB honor roll for the first time in their lives. And then I went on to become a teacher and train students who became champions in debate every single year.
So you were hired on at this place called the Ron Clark Academy, which, if people haven't heard about it, I Googled it after reading your book. It sounds like a literally magical place. Will you describe it for us?
Oh, it's such a magical place. In fact, it's the real life Hogwarts. And it's a school in Atlanta, Georgia, and Ron Clark, who is the founder, he recruits who he believes to be the best educators in the world, to teach in this building. And so he gave me a chance, when I was and fresh out of college, and usually he does not hire new teachers, but because of this debate program that I created, and because of the work that I was doing with young people, he saw something in me that I honestly didn't even see in myself. And so he gave me an opportunity to join his faculty of master educators at the Ron Clark Academy.
At the time, some of your colleagues were like, "How did this guy get on staff?"
Yeah, they were very incredulous because I was inexperienced. I did not seem qualified on paper. I was not qualified, to teach at this place. But that wasn't important to Ron Clark, because he saw a fire and a passion in me, that supersedes any credential. He saw my ability to engage young people and my ability to be creative and innovative. And he said that's the one I want in my building. And that changed my life.
So how did you end up at Harvard?
So at that school, the Ron Clark Academy, I started the speech and debate team. We're middle school, and competing at middle school tournaments at one point, it was no longer competitive for us. And so I started entering my students into high school tournaments. And we went to a high school tournament and we went undefeated. And there at that tournament, there was a woman who came up to my students and said, "I want to meet your teacher." And they brought her over to me, and she shook my hand and introduced herself as a representative of the Harvard Debate Council at Harvard University. And she said, "There's something I think you would be perfect for." And she sent a recommendation up to the university for me to join their summer debate teaching faculty.
And when you were there, you had a great experience, but you also had some criticisms for the program.
Yeah, I looked around me and I saw that there was a lack of African American representation there, and honestly, I didn't want to make a big deal about it because I was just lucky to be there in the first place, and so I certainly didn't want to get there and pick a fight, but I asked myself, why me? When I looked around at Harvard University, a place that nothing in my life seemed to qualify me for, and I looked at my journey and everything I had been through, and I realized that my being there had to be far bigger than just me. There had to be some greater purpose because when I look at people that I grew up with who were still stuck in the hood or not alive or in jail, that could have been me. So why am I the one that made it out? And I realized it was never about me. It was always about something bigger that was in store for me to do. And so I had a conversation with my boss and said, we need to do something about the lack of African American representation on this campus. And he said he agreed. And that's when I came up with the idea to create this department within the university called the Harvard Diversity Project.
This is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. So Harvard was delighted to have you working on this, but it was like literally a Cinderella deal with all of the downsides. They said you could do this, but you had to raise every penny to keep it going.
I did. Campus organizations at Harvard are independently funded. And so they said, you could do this, but, how are you going to raise the money? And I said, don't worry about it. I got it. I'll make it happen. And then I kind of put the cart before the horse because, I accepted this group of students, 25 students, and it went viral online because we had this grand surprise acceptance and it broke national headlines. 25 Black youth headed to Harvard, but I had no money. We didn't have any money to actually send them to Harvard. So now, I'm in a position where I can be publicly embarrassed, because we've made this big deal about these students we're sending to Harvard, and I couldn't get people to support the initiative. I couldn't raise the funds. But then, a miracle happened, and I found someone who believed in me, Rodney Bullard from the Chick-fil-A Foundation, and he supported with a gift to the organization, and it created a ripple effect, in the city, and other philanthropists joined in and started to support as well. And we were able to raise those funds and send those students to Harvard.
Most of the teachers I know really care about their students, including the ones who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Are teachers in America lacking resources or motivation? Why are so many kids still slipping through the cracks?
I think a lot of times we try to make it about policy. And don't get me wrong, there's certainly policies in place that make teaching challenging for teachers. But I think fundamentally, Chris, we have to understand that this is hard work. It's hard work, which means it is a field that is heavily driven by passion. And I understand that it's difficult to have metrics around passion, but passion really does produce results. And one of the things I say all the time is the truth is, we have a lot of teachers. We live in a day and time and culture where teachers tend to love their subject more than they love their students. And we see that in the results, of teachers who may have signed up to teach English because they love books, not because they love kids. And so I tell people candidly, that when they look at my reinvention and my transformation, that school didn't change me, English didn't change me, academics did not change me, love is what changed me. And so my philosophy of education is doing what my professor did for me in college, and that is love first, teach second.
Brandon P. Fleming is assistant coach of debate at Harvard University and founder of the nationally acclaimed Harvard Diversity Project. His memoir is called Miseducated. Brandon, thank you so much for making time to talk to us today.
Oh, it's my privilege. Thank you so much for having me on.
Think is a production of KERA in Dallas. Our team includes Stephen Becker, Paige Phelps, Ana Perez, Nilofer Arsala, and Micaela Rodriguez. Our interns are Angelica Perez, Tammy George, and Marissa Green. You can listen to Think wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Chris Boyd. Have a great day.